Hey guys, welcome back. This is going to be the second module of the three modules that are going to be posted after spring break. This week is going to be all about classification and the different classification systems used in biology. Before we get started, I just want to take a minute and thank everybody that's been submitting work. Even though I know for a lot of you it's not required. For those of you who it is required for, I really appreciate all the work you've been doing and putting in. I've loved reading through all of your comments. And you're doing a great job for not being in person. You're doing really well. I also wanted to give a little update on just me and what I've been up to. So I think last time I told you guys that I was starting some tomato plants. So I've got them. They're growing pretty well. They're about 3 to 4 inches tall now. They're outside in a little greenhouse box that I have going. Got the garden tilled up. I've been going out fishing every few days here for the past week or so, except when it was raining. I don't know if you guys can tell because of the light that I have around me, but I got a little bit of a burn going on. Not too bad, but definitely a little red. And Harley's enjoyed having me around. He's been spending some time with the grandparents while I'm out at the lake. I've also been going through some of my rock and mineral collections. Like literally I'm sitting here and I have lots of them just right here. That's a little part of the geode. Yeah, I know. Very interesting. But anything to keep me busy, keep me going. I've been working on trying to polish some stuff, so I'm working on polishing like this little purple one, eventually possibly make it into a necklace. I have a little amber one here. I don't think you can see it. But working on just, keeping myself busy. I hope you guys have been enjoying the weather too. Again, Wednesdays from 1 to 2, I have office hours. If you want to talk about anything, have questions, please log in and talk to me. Even if you don't have anything to talk about other than like life, that's fine too. I will be there. I posted on the Canvas page my office hours, the link to the office hours, Ms. Griffin's office hour link as well as you can text me. I put a number you guys can text me if you would like to do that as well, to get in contact, and you can email anytime. All right, so we're going to get started. This week, again, all about biological classification. The first activity is to watch this video and answer the questions. So if you haven't already pulled up this separate sheet, go ahead, pause, pull this up, because you'll be answering some questions as you go on this sheet. The sheet is linked on Canvas right under this video in modules. Activity number 2 will be a small PowerPoint project about classification. And then task 3 will be a drag and drop, which is kind of like an online sort type of activity. And those are the 3 activities this week. So right now we're going to go through what is biological classification. So essentially there are tons and tons of different types of living things on Earth, and we're going to talk about how scientists classify them and put them into different groups. And that is biological classification. So just to give you an idea of the extent to the number of organisms that scientists have to classify, the Earth has tons of diversity. There are roughly 5,200 different types of prokaryotic organisms. Remember, prokaryotic organisms are ones that do not have a nucleus, so things like bacteria. So there are roughly 5,200 different types of bacteria. There are roughly 5,100,000 types of fungi, 400,000 types of plants, 52,000 types of vertebrates, and over 1 million types of insects. So that is a very vast group, and we didn't include all of them. So there are tons of organisms that scientists have to classify, and we use one system to do it. So classification itself is just how people group objects by similarities. So we do this every day. Even things like shoes, we have a way to classify. When we talk about it, everybody knows the difference between a boot and a sneaker, and flip-flops versus sandals. And that's because they're in a group based on similarities. So even though each different type of flip-flop is different, when I say I'm wearing flip-flops, you guys know what I'm talking about. You might not know what color they are or what toe they go between or anything like that, but you generally know the characteristic of a flip-flop. Taxonomy is going to be the specific branch of biology that works on naming and classifying species, and then combining each species into larger groups based on the similar characteristics that they share. So we're going to go through each of these specifically, but essentially what this is saying is that there's one group that has tons and tons and tons of different organisms. So maybe this one is all organisms that have a nucleus. So that would include things like bears and zebra and fish and plants and mushrooms, and I think that's a paramecium. But when I take that one group and I split it down to only those in the animal kingdom, only animals, it gets a little smaller. And then when I separate that into, I'm not really sure what this group is, maybe having a spinal cord, it gets a little smaller. And then when I separate it into mammal, it gets a little smaller. And every time I change the characteristics a little bit and get more specific, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller until eventually I'm in a group with only one type of organism. So in this case, let's just say that's a black bear because that's what it looks like to me from here. So it looks like a bear, and it gets really small. And if you notice here, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different groups, and the system we're going to talk about has 8 specific groups. Now, classification started a long, long time ago with the Greek philosopher Aristotle. He is the one who began putting living things into groups. But eventually another scientist came around and created a more unique system based on Aristotle's current one. And his name was Carolus Linnaeus. He is considered the father of taxonomy because he created the groups that we classify living things into. He was a botanist, meaning he studied plants. And he came up with the system that we currently use today, in which we classify organisms based on their physical characteristics, such as appearance, and their structural or internal characteristics, which we can't see. And we group organisms based on the similarities that they have, either physically or structurally. So go ahead and pause. You're going to answer question 1 on your sheet, which is, who was Carolus Linnaeus? So who was Carolus Linnaeus? Go ahead and answer that. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what is a species. We've thrown around this word a lot this year, what a species is. And I think in ecology we talked about it, but we're going to mention it again here. A species is a group of organisms that are unique, and they are able to breed with each other and produce fertile offspring. And they do not reproduce with members of other groups. So a species is a unique group of organisms that can breed with each other, make fertile offspring, but can't breed with other species. So an example of using this definition to distinguish between 2 species would be in the case of the horse and a zebra. A horse and a zebra can mate. They can have an offspring. However, their offspring, which is called a zebroid, is sterile, meaning that zebroid cannot have offspring of its own. Because the zebroid cannot have offspring of its own, that means that the horse and the zebra are in 2 different species. Because based on the definition of a species is a group of organisms that can mate with one another, and their offspring are fertile and able to have babies. So because a zebroid cannot have babies of its own, A horse and a zebra are not in the same species. So go ahead and pause, answer question 2 on your sheet. Question 2 says, what makes two organisms a member of the same species? So in order to be in the same species, what do two organisms have to be able to do or have in common? So now we're going to talk about binomial nomenclature, which is the system that Carolus Linnaeus developed. So binomial nomenclature, if we break it down, the prefix bi means two, nomial means name, and nomenclature is a naming system. So a two-word naming system, binomial nomenclature, is used to name every species on the planet. So every species on the planet has two names that is referred to as. For example, you guys have probably heard humans are Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens or Homo sapien is our scientific name. This comes from us getting those two names by using our genus and our species to name us. So every organism, no matter what type you are, gets its scientific name by using the genus and the species to name you. So genus and species are the two most specific categories that organisms are classified into. The genus is the second to most specific, and this is going to give an organism its first name. And a genus is a group of similar species. So the human genus is Homo. Other similar species to humans are also in the same genus, Homo. An example would be Neanderthals or Homo erectus. Different organisms that humans evolved from are also in the genus Homo. Species is the second name to each organism. It is the most specific group that an organism is placed into based on the unique characteristics of that organism. For humans, our species is sapien. So humans are called Homo sapiens because we're named after our genus and our species. One thing that you'll notice is that in every name, the genus is always capitalized, but the species is not. So H in Homo is capitalized, but the S in sapien is not capitalized. Now you might be wondering why we're having all these weird Latin names. And just remember that this system was developed way back in the Middle Ages when scientists were first beginning to name organisms. And back then, and even still currently, the only universal language that is not changing and that is stable is Latin. So, for instance, when I was in college, I had a friend from Florida, and she visited my house and my parents. And just small differences in dialect, she wasn't really able to understand sometimes what my parents were saying, just based on the different dialect for where we came from. The same thing is true of different people who speak Spanish or French. Exactly where you grew up learning that language, there are small things that are different. Words may be pronounced differently. So for scientists and doctors, having some type of common universal language is very important. I mean, can you imagine being a doctor going to a different country where they speak a different language and trying to communicate to save the life of a patient, and you don't speak the same language? And the way that you get around this scientifically is by having your common language be universal, which would be Latin. Latin is the only universal language. So even though they might not be able to communicate traditionally, medically, they can still communicate one another because most of the terms in science and medicine have a basis in Latin. So it's very important for that to be universal. So go ahead and pause. You're going to answer question number 3. Question number 3 is explain binomial nomenclature. So what is it? Or how did it come about? How does it work? So explain binomial nomenclature. Okay, so going into the actual classification system on a whole that Carlos Linnaeus developed, all living things are placed into 8 different taxons. Taxon is a group, and each taxon is arranged based on how closely related you are. So the more related 2 organisms are, the more of those groups they have in common. It's kind of like a little branching tree. You all start in the same group, and then you branch out. So we're going to take a look at that here. Here are the 8 different classification groups. The largest with the most organisms is domain. So an example of a domain would be all organisms with a nucleus. Then the domains are broken into kingdoms. An example of that would be like animals. The kingdoms are then broken into phylums. Phylums are broken into classes. The classes are broken into orders. Then orders are broken into families. Families are broken into genuses. And genuses are broken into species. So, again, we're named after the 2 most specific groups that were put in. One thing to keep in mind, if 2 organisms are in the same family, they had to be in the same order, class, family, phylum, and domain. So if you're in the same family, you also had to be in the same order, class, phylum, domain, kingdom. So everything above it, because this is kind of like a branching tree. So in order for that to work, you have to be in the same group. And let me see if I can make a copy of this so that I can write and show you exactly how that works, just in case it pops up. Sorry for the delay. This will make a bit more sense once I draw it out. So if I have 2 organisms and we're both in the same domain, I break the domain into kingdoms. So now there are 6 kingdoms. So these are kingdoms. Then after kingdoms, I have phylums. Then I have class. So let's just only go that far. So each kingdom is then split into phylums. Each phylum is then split into classes. So again, this is going to be a very, very, very large tree if you were to draw the whole thing out all the way down. So let's say 2 organisms, both organisms are in the same class. When I follow this back, they're also in the same phylum. When I follow that back, they're in the same kingdom. When I follow that back, they're in the same domain. So again, if they're in the same genus, they're in the same family, order, class, phylum, kingdom, and domain because of the way that they branch out. So it's just kind of like a little branching system there. There is a way for you to remember all of these different classifications. Again, domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. And the way that you can remember them is with this little mnemonic device. And the way that you can remember it is just remembering this little saying. Do kings play chess on fat green snakes? So do kings play chess on fat green snakes? D for domain, K for kingdom, P for phylum, C for class, O for order, F for family, G for genus, S for species. So remembering that one little saying will help you remember all the different classification groups. And here's an example. This is a picture of an orca, which is just a large whale. Even though the domain isn't listed here, I'll tell you, the orca is in the domain eukarya for eukaryote, eukaryote meaning it has a nucleus. So it has a nucleus, then it's broken into the animal kingdom. It's part of the animal kingdom. It has a chordata, meaning it has a spinal cord. It is a mammal. Then it's broken into order, family, genus, and then the species, which is actually orca. A lot of times, or sometimes for some animals, the species can actually be the name that we call it. So for I can't think of another one that follows that, but when you hear of Felix domesticus, oh, hey, look, that's right here. That's a house cat. That was totally not related. I did not know that was going to be there. But Felix domesticus are the genus and species of a cat. Just a normal house cat. Trying to remember dog. I feel like dog is something familiaris. Canis familiaris, maybe, for dog. I believe that's dog. Okay, so just again, you're put into the same classification, no matter which one it is, based on your similarities. So similar kingdoms are in the same domain. Domain is then broken into kingdoms, then phylums, classes, order, families, and genuses. And that is where this chart comes from. Here's our domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. So right here. All right, so you're going to go ahead and pause, and we're going to go over here and answer questions 4, 5, and 6. Question 4. List the classification scheme from largest to smallest, and go ahead and include the mnemonic device that goes with it. So the first one was domain for do. Now you're going to have kingdom and king, and you're going to go on down. If you need to go back a little bit, you can. Question number 5. If two organisms are in the same family, what other taxons must they have in common? So if you forget that, go back to where I was explaining here just a little while ago. And question 6. A house cat's scientific name is Felix domesticus. Which genus does it belong to? So you just look at the name and which one of those two names is the genus of the organism. So go ahead and pause, answer 4, 5, and 6, and then we will continue. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about domains and then kingdoms. So biology, all living things are put into 3 main domains of life. And think about that. You remember all the organisms we had on slide 1? Millions and millions of them, over 5 million fungi, 5,200 bacteria, a million insects. All of those things are only put into 3 kingdoms. So there are only 3 kingdoms that all of life fit into. Those 3 kingdoms are bacteria, which are normal bacteria that make us sick. Archaea are going to be bacteria that live in extreme places, like in hot vents. And the third one is eukarya, which is anything that has a nucleus. So when we place organisms in different groups, there are several things that we consider. We consider their appearance and their behaviors, their chromosomal characteristics, so the traits that they have, the genes in their DNA, the amino acids and proteins they have. A lot of times they also look at the development, the embryological development of an organism and how it develops in the womb. They'll look at the fossil record to see like the past history of that organism, and all these similarities come from any of these groups. So all of these above are used to give us a little bit of reliable information about the history of that organism to help us figure out which organisms are more related to others and less related. And this goes back to some of the things we talked about last week in evolution. So when we're talking about structures, morphology, we're talking about, say, homologous versus analogous structures and trying to figure out who's more related. So we had our three main domains. We had eubacteria, we had archaea, so bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Those three domains are then split into 6 kingdoms. Fun fact is, 2 of the domains are their own kingdom, which doesn't happen a lot. It's the only example where that happens, where one group is the same as the one below it. And that's just because they're so large. So eubacteria are unicellular, one cell prokaryotes. And these are the bacteria that make you sick. Archaebacteria or archaea are the bacteria that live in extreme places. And then the domain eukarya or eukaryote having a nucleus, that's the one that's broken into 4 separate groups. And those groups are plant, animal, fungi, and protist. So we're going to go through and talk about them. That's the same picture we just talked through. So as I go through here, we're going to work on number 8. But before we go farther, go ahead and do number 7. So which of these species is most related to Felix rufus? So which one of these 4 is going to be most related to Felix rufus? We forget number 7, so go ahead and answer number 7. So I'm going to go through the 6 kingdoms. As we go through the 6 kingdoms, pause as you need to fill out this chart. I'll try to make a pause at the end of each slide to help you fill this out, and I will do my very best to make sure I answer each thing for each organism. Okay, but before we begin, I want to go back and remind you guys of 2 key vocab words, and those ones go in this category: prokaryote versus eukaryote. Remember, prokaryotes equals no nucleus. So pro equals no nucleus. Versus eukaryote, you can think of nuke. So eukaryotes have a nucleus. Prokaryotes are going to be all bacteria, are prokaryotic organisms. And we're going to go into the general characteristics of bacteria here in a second. That's just a little reminder of prokaryote versus eukaryote. Eukaryote, nucleus; pro, no nucleus. So we're going to start by talking about archaebacteria, which is the second category here. So make sure that when you're filling this out, you're in the second arrow. It goes a little bit out of order. So archaebacteria. Archaebacteria, all bacteria are one cell with no nucleus. So they're going to be one cell, no nucleus, so they're prokaryotic. They live in extreme places. So important facts would be extremophile. They live in extreme places. Examples of extreme places are going to be hot springs, hydrothermal vents, the inside of our stomach, the bacteria in our stomach. Our stomach is very, very acidic. So that is considered an extreme environment. Places with lots of salt or places with no oxygen, any type of extreme place, you're going to find archaebacteria. You do not need to worry about heterotroph or autotroph. And then an example, you could put any of these here. ones from hydrothermal vents, hot springs, the ones found in our stomach, ones found with no oxygen, or ones found with lots of salt. You could put any of the above in that one. All right. Keep hitting that button, messing up that sheet. All right, so our next one is eubacteria, which is the first one in the chart. Again, all bacteria are prokaryotic, meaning they have no nucleus. All bacteria are unicellular, only one cell. These are going to be the oldest organisms on Earth. These were the first organisms ever on Earth. And they are pathogenic, meaning that they can make you sick. So for important facts, you're going to put pathogenic. These are the ones that make you sick. So examples would be E. coli, bacteria that decompose things in the soil, and cyanobacteria. We're not going to worry about that part there. And again, for an example, E. coli, bacteria that breaks things down. Staph infections, strep throat. Those are examples of eubacteria, ones that make you sick. I'm going to do that every time. Okay, now we're going to move on to protist. So protist. These ones here, the first two that we talked about, those are our only prokaryotes. Everything else is eukaryote. So a protist this is actually going to be the junk drawer for our eukaryote category. These are one cell, so unicellular eukaryotes. So one-celled organisms with a nucleus. These organisms can be autotrophic, make their own food, or heterotropic, meaning eating other things for food. Examples could be amoeba, paramecium, or algae. The best place to find these, if you just get some pond water or lake water and you look at it under a microscope, you see these little things moving around in there, you'll probably see paramecium and amoebas. Those are going to be protists. They're one cells with a nucleus. You can put any of those here in example. Important facts. I don't really have that much for important facts here. You can say it's kind of like the junk drawer. If it doesn't fall in another group, it goes into protist category. One fun fact about amoebas. I'm sure you guys have heard somewhere from somebody that if you go into a lake or still standing water, you should always plug your nose or wear nose plugs. And if you haven't, you're hearing it from me. Because every year or so, you turn on the TV, probably August, September, almost every year on the news, you'll hear a case of somebody getting a brain-eating amoeba and then dying. So a brain-eating amoeba is a real thing. It is found in warm, standing water, so places where the water isn't moving a lot. So not typically found in oceans, not typically found in rivers, but lakes, specifically warm lakes. You can find brain-eating amoebas, and the way that they get into your body is by going up your nose and then into your brain. And they literally slowly eat away your brain. It happens fairly quickly, and I believe there's only been ever one person to survive a brain-eating amoeba. So while it is fairly rare, again, typically you'll only see about one case in the late summer months about someone dying of a brain-eating amoeba. To me, it is still worth plugging my nose if I'm going into a lake. So there's your safety tip of the day. Plug your nose. So now we're going to talk about fungi. Fungi, they're fun guys. So again, please be careful. Fungi goes down here. It skips a category or skips a spot. Fungi are eukaryotic organisms. They are multicellular, meaning they have more than one cell. They are heterotrophs, meaning they rely on something else to get their food. These ones feed through absorption. So they absorb their nutrients by breaking down other things. For examples, you can list any of the ones I'll say here. Mushrooms are decomposers. Some of these mushrooms have that trippy, weird fear of hole textures that people don't like. I don't really like it, actually. Along with different types of mold. Molds are fungi, as well as yeast. Yeast is also a fungi. Note, a lot of fungi reproduce using spores. So all of these reproduce using spores, meaning you kind of put them out in the air, and that's how they reproduce. So that's our fungi category. Now we're going to talk about plants. So we're going back up here, filling in this one that we missed. So plants, these are eukaryotic organisms because their cells have a nucleus. Plants are multicellular because they are made of many cells. They are autotrophs because they use the sun to make their own food. Plants have a cell wall, and they do photosynthesis. Examples of plants include trees, grasses, ferns, flowers. Typically anything that has a part on it that is green is a plant. So flowers, trees, grass, ferns, moss, all plants. And then our last category or kingdom is the animal kingdom. You might hear it referred to as Animalia. It just means animal kingdom. So the animal kingdom has cells that have a nucleus, so they're eukaryotes. Animals are multicellular because they have many cells. They're made of many cells. They are heterotrophs because they rely on something else to get their food. And they are also motile. Motile means can move. The animal kingdom is the only kingdom that actually has the ability to move willingly. Now, for examples of the animal kingdom, organisms in the animal kingdom, you can go as simple as a sponge, as complex as a human, a spider, peacock, I'm not really sure what that is, lion, turtle, worm, butterfly. Any of those you can use for the animal kingdom. Okay, so that was it for the actual PowerPoint. The only thing left is to answer the remaining questions on the sheet and then turn your sheet in on Canvas. So I'll go through with you for the last questions. We'll go through them here together. So naming, describing, and classifying organisms into different categories based on their characteristics is a definition of adaptive radiation, natural selection, or taxonomy. So that is number 8. Number 9. Which of the following groups would contain the largest number of organisms? Again, if you go back up to here where you filled this section out, which one of those 4 would be the largest? Again, domain is the largest, species is the smallest, and they're in order from largest to smallest. So which one of these is the largest? Class, order, phylum, family. Number 10. What kingdom of life contains organisms that cannot move but have a nucleus, are heterotropic and multicellular. So you go back up to this chart. They cannot move, have a nucleus. So have a nucleus narrows us down to these four. We know they can't move, so it's either protist, plant, or fungi. They're heterotrophs and multicellular. So which kingdom? Number 11, an organism that is autotropic, has a nucleus, but is only one cell, is an example of what kingdom? So one cell with a nucleus. What kingdom is it? Go back up to your chart and help you figure that one out. Number 12, what kingdom of life contains organisms that are found in extreme environments and are prokaryotic? So extreme environments should be your key there. So which ones are found in extreme environments and are prokaryotic? That'll be in your chart. Number 13, a new organism has been discovered in the mountains of Virginia. It has a nucleus, can make its own food. So nucleus, make its own food. That means autotroph, and is multicellular. What kingdom does it belong to? So nucleus, autotroph, multicellular. What kingdom is that? Or could it be? Maybe it's more than one. Maybe not. All right, so number 14, we have this chart here. You can blow it up to make it larger on your screen if you need to. The cucumber belongs in the very long Cucurbiaceae family and is recognized by its long trailing vines with fuzzy 3 to 4, 5 pointed leaves and long spiny fruit. Use the characteristics in the chart above. Which plant is most closely related to the cucumber? So use this chart. Here's the cucumber. Which one is most closely related to it? One way that I recommend doing this is, here's for each trait you have, so sprawling vines. This one is sprawling vines. These ones do not, so I'm not going to circle them. Dark or fuzzy dark green with 3 to 5 lobes for the leaves. Here's 3 to 5. And let's see, do we have fuzzy? We have fuzzy, fuzzy. No dark green. Those are in common. Flowers are yellow. So circle all the similarities. Long and spiny. Large and egg-shaped. Large. I don't see any other long and spiny. So which one did we circle the most things in is going to be the one that is the most related to it. So go through eggplant, pumpkin, pepper, okra. Which one most related to the cucumber? All right, so you're going to answer this, turn it in on Canvas. Your next activity is a PowerPoint presentation. And then the last one for this module is going to be that drag and drop. Those will be your last 2 activities, PowerPoint presentation, and then drag and drop sort. Let's go ahead, turn this in on Canvas, and check out those activities. Thanks.